She was a beautiful college co-ed, ready to conquer the world.
She was a bright and shining star.
He was a slightly older man who promised to fulfill her every desire.
He was somewhat of a father figure and also a boyfriend.
Their bond seemed to be solid as a rock until a shocking disappearance shattered their picture-perfect romance.
She just disappeared into thin air.
Friends and family launch a desperate search to uncover the truth.
Just let me know where she is.
I wasn't gonna stop until either we found her or found out what happened to her.
The hunt turned into a real sordid chapter.
A chapter that was dripping with jealousy, intrigue, and in the end, an unspeakable evil.
I knew for a fact I was having a meeting with the devil. It sent a chill through me.
This son of a bitch was playing games with the family. He knew what had happened.
This isn't happening. This is not happening.
Wednesday, March 21st, 2007, 5:30 p.m. Investigator Sidney Miller and his partner are driving down a highway north of Houston, Texas. A pair of passengers in the back seat are giving them directions to the possible location of a missing 19-year-old woman who disappeared 6 days prior.
She had actually been missing since March the 15th of 2007.
On the passenger's instructions, the detectives exit the highway and pull into an apartment complex.
He directed us to the back of the complex, to this parking lot, where he pointed out this dumpster.
Fearing the worst, Investigator Miller and his partner peer inside, but the dumpster is empty.
You sure this is it?
There was no obvious human remains that I could see at that point.
Was this some kind of sick joke, or another dead end in an ever more troubling case?
We didn't know where she was. At that point, we didn't know what happened to her.
To unlock the mystery of this missing woman, detectives will follow a twisted path of lust and betrayal, lovers and lies, all of which leads to a young woman whose bright future was snuffed out in the darkest way imaginable. Early on, Tynesha Stewart's family knew there was something special about her.
My family just knew that Tynesha was gonna stand out and accomplish so much.
But Tynesha was no stranger to hard times. One of 6 children, Tynesha grew up in one of Houston's toughest neighborhoods and lost her father at a very young age. Still, Tynesha refused to let her environment dictate her future.
She was really good in school. She really studied her books. She took that very serious.
Blessed with natural beauty and an infectious smile, Tynesha had no problem attracting boys.
Tynesha always had multiple guys wanting to date her.
But Tynesha wanted more from love than what the average guy could offer.
Tynesha was more attracted to someone that could challenge her.
In May 2005, while working at a pizza restaurant, the stunning 17-year-old met a man that fit the bill. Handsome coworker, Tim Shepard.
So what's up? We still on for this weekend?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You promise.
I gotta study.
Oh, you gonna act funny now?
Tim would keep asking her to go out on dates. Eventually, she just gave in and said, okay, I'll try it.
We're gonna do a little dancing. It's gonna be a good time.
Okay.
We went from them just being friends or co-workers to them actually developing an intimate relationship with each other.
Bye. That's my favorite part.
Yeah, it's gonna become my favorite show.
Although Tim was 25, neither he nor Tynesha let their 8-year age gap stand in the way of their budding romance.
Tim and Tynesha's relationship progressed pretty swiftly. It just became really serious.
I'm so happy.
Yeah, because I'm here.
Yes, because you're here.
But just as this steamy relationship reached a boiling point, Tynesha's family turned down the heat.
So a phone call is more important than me?
Hey, Mom. Yeah, it's Tim. Don't do that. Mom, don't do that. Like, come on, really?
We wanted to know what his motives were. He could have picked any other woman that was his age to date. Why is he dating such a young girl?
Like, I don't know.
It'd be fine, look. Just do a little in-house visit. I'll smooth everything out.
Really?
Yeah. Had it in the wrong place, I think.
So it's something simple.
I think you just gotta plug this plug in. Yeah.
In order to prove how much he loved Tynesha, Tim began spending time with her family. It didn't take long for Tim to win them over.
There you have it.
Yes!
Oh, no problem. You're welcome.
He was always around at my mom's house, trying to fix their TV, trying to fix their computers.
Going right for the table.
You know, I try to do what I can.
Thank you, Tim.
Oh, you're welcome.
They embraced him as another son. Her mom embraced him, her sister, her brother embraced him as like another brother.
But just when it seemed like the young couple couldn't get any closer, some good news took Tanisha's life in a different direction.
Tanisha earned a scholarship to Texas A&M University.
I was so happy for her. It was a big accomplishment.
Even though the A&M campus is nearly 2 hours from Tanisha's home in Houston, Tanisha was determined to keep her relationship with Tim alive. But just 3 months into her first semester in college, Tim reignited a relationship with an old girlfriend and subsequently dumped Tanisha.
I remember Tanisha just bawling, crying, stating that she couldn't believe that her and Tim had broken up.
But no sooner had Tim broken up with Tanisha than he realized he'd made a terrible mistake.
He decided to go down to Texas A&M and surprise her, and from there they were able to talk and discuss whatever issues they were having, and from there they started back dating.
But this time around, something seemed different.
They just weren't seeing eye to eye, and Tanisha was on a different level. She became even more independent.
She was meeting new people and trying new things out on her own. Tanisha's goal was to move forward in life.
When Tanisha returned home for spring break, she saw Tim briefly, but spent most of her time hanging out with friends.
Who's going to the concert with?
They're my girlfriends.
Okay. I'm gonna see you afterwards.
Well, we're trying to go eat afterward.
So I have to set up appointments to see my girlfriend now?
No, it's not like that.
I heard Tanisha was coming home for spring break, and I briefly talked to her. She told me that her and a couple of her friends were going to see Beyonce in concert.
But a few days before the concert, Tanisha's sister Gayla had a nightmare.
I had a bad dream that some jealous girls jumped on her and beat her, and we couldn't find her body. Tanisha was like, oh, calm down. I promise you that I'ma be okay.
Sadly, Gayla's nightmare would hit closer to home than anyone in Tanisha's family could have ever imagined. Sunday, March 18th, 2007. As Gayla returns home from church, she receives a disturbing phone call from her mother.
Hello?
Gayla?
Hey,
you
Mom.
talked to Tanisha?
No, not since Thursday. Why?
Oh my goodness, nobody's heard from her.
What do you mean nobody's heard from her?
She was supposed to go to the Beyonce concert. I knew that. And then she didn't show up.
She never made it to the concert?
No.
Oh my God, Mom.
My heart had dropped because I knew and I felt it in my spirit, in my soul, that something was wrong.
Tanisha's friends echo those sentiments. 36 hours pass, and there's still no sign of Tanisha.
I'm terrified because I don't know what's going on at all. It does not make sense to me.
Why is this going on? Why is this happening?
Police would soon be asking the same questions, but nobody could anticipate the horrific answers they would uncover, or what hidden desires burned in the heart of a missing young woman. For 2 years, Tim Shepard and Tanisha Stewart had a love that knew no bounds.
When she finally decided to start dating him, she cut off, anybody else at the time.
However, when Tanisha moved away to college in the fall of 2006, her and Tim's once unbreakable bond began showing a few cracks.
It was on and off, but she still would come back and visit with Tim. And I believe Tanisha was still in love with him.
But in March 2007, their world turns upside down when Tanisha returns home for spring break and inexplicably disappears. Several days pass, and there's still no sign of Tanisha.
We went around to some hospitals. We even called the jail, just trying to cover all bases, and no one had heard from her.
Gayla Taylor also reaches out to her sister's boyfriend, Tim Shepard. But like everyone else, Tim has no clue what happened to Tanisha.
Hello?
Tim, hey, this is Gayla.
Hey, what's up?
What's going on?
Mom just called me saying that Tanisha's missing.
What? Hold on. Missing? What do you mean missing?
Yeah, she's missing. She's not answering her phone.
When is the last time you talked to her?
According to Tim, the last he spoke with Tynesha was 3 days prior, on Thursday morning.
It was like she came over to the house with me, but she left, and that was the last time I heard her or seen her.
Nobody's talked to her since then?
No, it's not like Tanisha to just leave and not answer her phone and not call anybody and not check in.
Fearing the worst, Tynesha's family files a missing persons report Monday, March 19th. Once investigators realized Tim was one of the last people to see Tynesha, they asked him to come down to the station.
So, Mr. Shepard, can you tell me the last time you talked to Tanisha?
A couple of days ago, Thursday.
His story was that he picked Tanisha up that Thursday morning around 3 o'clock in the morning.
So you was driving back to your apartment Thursday. Did y'all talk about anything?
Tried to. She got a phone call from, some guy.
The caller was Tanisha's college friend, Mark Marks, who she'd hung out with earlier that night.
This upset Timothy. When they get back to the apartment, Timothy confronts Tynesha about why is he calling you so early in the morning. And Tynesha says, I don't want to talk about it, and we can talk about it when we wake up.
I mean, we've kind of having relationship problems, so I was just trying to smooth things out, and got to the apartment. She just went in the room. She didn't want to mention anything about it. So I kind of suspected she was cheating on me a little.
Tim tells investigators that despite his misgivings, he agreed to table the issue as Tanisha requested. But when they woke up a few hours later, Tim confronted Tanisha about the phone call with Mark Marks. Again, she stonewalled him.
Ty, we need to talk about this.
Talk about what?
About what? This whole situation.
What whole situation? There's nothing to talk about.
Once they get up, he confronts her about why Mr. Marks called her so early in the morning. Tanisha says, I don't want to talk about it. I'm tired of talking about it.
There's nothing to talk about?
No, it's not.
Okay, what about Mark then?
We're not talking about Mark. Like, I'm not talking
Okay,
this.
well...
Like, really? I came home to have fun. I'm not doing this.
Are you serious?
Bye.
According to Tim, Tanisha then stormed out of his apartment.
She left the apartment and left walking on her own that day. And that was the last time he says that he saw her.
Tim, are you being honest with us?
Yes, I'm being honest.
And you don't have any idea where she is?
I have no idea. I love Tanisha.
They questioned him for, I think they said 20 hours, something like that.
While Tim never wavers from his account, police are curious if his apartment might tell another story.
When Shepard gave his statement, he also gave us written consent, voluntary consent to search his apartment.
But a search of Tim's apartment fails to turn up any evidence related to Tanisha's disappearance.
We didn't have any strong suspicion that he had done anything illegal, so we gave him the key back to his apartment and we continued our investigation.
With Tim all but eliminated as a suspect, detectives set their sights on another man, Mark Marks.
He was one of the last two people to be around Tanisha. So quite naturally, Mark Marks was a person that law enforcement wanted to speak with.
Had Tanisha been seeing Mark Marks on the side? If so, could Mark be involved in Tanisha's disappearance? Hoping to answer these questions, detectives reach out to one of Tanisha's closest friends, Ashley Walton, and make a shocking discovery.
I want to thank you for coming down here, taking your time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
Of course.
Just got a few questions to ask you.
Yeah.
Ever heard of a Mark Marks?
Of course I have. I mean, I set him and Tanisha up. He's a friend of my boyfriend. Him and Tanisha were together for maybe a month or so. They're crazy about each other.
They hit it off. But at the time, Tanisha was still dating Timothy.
Now, let me ask you this. Did Mark know about Tim?
Yes, he did. He didn't really like the fact that he had shared Tanisha with anybody. I mean, who would like that kind of idea?
Well, then why didn't she break it off with Tim?
I mean, it's hard, when you love someone, because she did love Tim.
Like I said, I appreciate you coming down here and talking with us.
The interview with Ashley is a revelation, and police can't help but wonder, could Tanisha's ongoing relationship with Tim have triggered some sort of jealous rage in boyfriend number 2, Mark Marks? Determined to unravel this mystery, detectives track Mark Marks down and bring him in for questioning on Wednesday, March 21st.
What's the nature of your relationship with Tanisha?
Or dating?
Mark was a typical 19-year-old kid. I mean, couple of tattoos, sharp, articulate. He was cooperative.
Did you know she was dating Tim Shepard as well?
Yeah, sure, she told me.
So how did that make you feel?
Well, I didn't like it.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Turning up the heat, detectives press Mark for answers.
So when was the last time you saw her?
It was last Thursday.
He indicated that he had last seen her earlier Thursday. She was at some other friend's house at the time, but he had left her at the apartment.
What time was that?
I don't know, like 3 a.m.?
Did you talk about your relationship that evening?
Yeah, sure, we talked about a lot. I mean, she told me that she was ready to leave Tim, that she and I were gonna be together. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, but that she was ready to move on.
Detectives are suspicious. Mark's statement places him with Tynesha shortly before Tim picked her up. Is it possible seeing Tynesha with Tim sent Mark into a jealous rage, and that Mark waited until she left Tim's apartment a few hours later to exact his revenge?
Did you have anything to do with her disappearance?
No, not at all.
Did you pick her up from Tim's apartment?
Absolutely not.
Mark Marks is adamant he had nothing to do with Tynesha's disappearance. He also claims to have a rock-solid alibi. He was at a party with friends on nearby South Padre Island at the time Tynesha vanished.
So you have no idea what happened to her?
No, not at all. I love Tanisha. She was all I cared about. I would never do anything to hurt her.
Detectives confirm Mark's alibi and let him go.
He was as innocent as they come. It showed that it really shook him when he learned that Tynesha was missing.
With their top two suspects in the clear, detectives begin looking elsewhere. That's when a frightening theory surfaces. The possibility that Tynesha might have been abducted by a stranger after leaving Tim Shepard's apartment on foot.
We had to broaden our picture and start looking at all the other angles or possibilities that she could have come up missing.
1 week into the investigation, fear continues to mount, and with each passing day, the chances of finding Tynesha become slimmer and slimmer.
The first 24 to 48 hours are the most crucial time when someone is kidnapped or comes up missing. And after that 48-hour period, they're either dead or gone.
But as detectives dig deeper into Tynesha's case, they uncover a series of shocking yet seemingly unrelated clues. The question is, can they connect the dots before it's too late? Ever since 19-year-old Tynesha Stewart started college, her romance with boyfriend Tim Shepard had been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
They did love each other, but it was not a smooth relationship.
Tim hoped to work out the kinks in the relationship when Tynesha returned home over spring break. But shortly after arriving, Tynesha vanished without a trace.
Nothing was making sense because we couldn't find her.
Although investigators have put both Tim and Tynesha's new love interest, Mark Marks, through intense interrogations, they're still no closer to finding her. And now they're faced with a far more chilling prospect, that Tynesha may have been abducted by a stranger after leaving Tim's apartment on foot.
We were looking at the whole picture, whether somebody picked her up in a car and took her off, or somebody, grabbed inside one of the apartments.
Police combed the area surrounding the apartments where Tim lives.
He lived in the back of his apartments, and his apartment was down a dark road full of trees and woods.
While officers are searching the area for clues, back at headquarters, a tip rolls in. A woman who lives in the area recalls hearing something very suspicious around the time Tynesha disappeared.
Dispatch, do you have a K-9 unit in service? Okay, have them meet us at 675 Cumberland. We're on the way. I just talked to a neighbor. She heard gunshots coming from the wood lines the night of Tanisha's disappearance. Said that she heard the car speed off. I got K-9 units on the way.
When the K-9 unit arrives, they immediately notice the faint smell of death in the air.
Smell that? Yeah, let's go see what we can find.
All right, let's go.
Inside my head, I just knew that somewhere around there we were gonna find her body.
Locking onto the scent, the K-9 officer leads investigators deeper into the woods. Minutes later, they finally locate the source of the smell.
What you got, bud?
The rotting remains of a dead animal.
That's not what we're looking for.
Yeah, not a bad thing, though.
All right.
While friends and family breathe a sigh of relief, the clock is ticking. Tynesha's sister Gayla decides it's time to join detectives in the search.
I started calling family, friends, getting my own search party together. They came the next day with a whole bunch of more volunteers.
We knocking on doors, talking to neighbors that may have seen or heard something, that may have seen her walking away.
Despite the additional boots on the ground, nobody recalls seeing Tynesha. But several residents make the same curious observation, that Tim Shepard spent the day after Tynesha's disappearance doing some serious barbecuing.
He had 2 grills going at one point, and they were concerned Timothy was going to burn the place down.
Worried neighbors said they dialed 911 once the smoke got out of control. After police and firemen contained the fire, they turned their attention toward Tim.
What's all the smoke here from today?
I was doing some last-minute grilling.
Tim told first responders he was cooking the main course for an upcoming church picnic.
How much meat you cooking?
It's for about 150, 200 people. Just throwing meat on the grill, I got a little bit behind, so it's just kind of got chaos.
Just kind of flamed up?
Yeah.
This is a lot of smoke.
It is, man. I had a lot of food.
The building's on fire.
Tim's story is confirmed when firemen looked around his apartment.
One of the firemen reported seeing what he thought was ribs in a bathtub that was filled with water, meat.
To detectives, it seems odd that Tim would be more interested in grilling out than helping look for his girlfriend.
If he really loved her, why is he not searching for her?
As detectives ponder that very question, they receive another bizarre report about Tim.
I myself talked to one particular individual who noticed him pouring bleach on his patio, and she said it was so strong that it was burning her eyes.
Was Tim just trying to clean up after his grill session got a bit out of hand? Or was he trying to hide something else?
That led law enforcement to look at him as a potential suspect.
When detectives shine the light of suspicion on Tim, they find something dark lurking just under the surface. But they'll also soon discover it is another man, not Tim, who holds the key to unlocking the mystery behind Tynesha Stewart's disappearance. It's been a week since 19-year-old college freshman Tynesha Stewart vanished without a trace. Although police initially ruled out her longtime boyfriend Tim Shepard as a suspect, recent reports of suspicious behavior have police circling back to him.
Tenants reported Shepard barbecuing for a period from Friday all the way over the weekend, continuously.
Perhaps more importantly, neighbors also reported seeing Tim cleaning his patio with an inordinate amount of bleach shortly after Tynesha's disappearance. Could Tim be trying to cover something up? If so, what? Hoping to learn more about Tim and Tynesha's history, detectives reach back out to her friends and family. While no one denies Tim loved Tynesha, they say that the more Tynesha spread her wings at college, the more possessive and domineering Tim became.
He felt like he pretty much owned her.
He would call, harass her, and at times even drove down to Texas A&M, walking the campus trying to find her when she wouldn't return his phone calls.
But despite Tim's increasingly controlling nature, he still held a special place in Tynesha's heart.
She just longed for Timothy to love her, without abuse, without control, without violence.
But when Tim learned about Tynesha's blossoming relationship with college friend Mark Marks, the situation went from bad to worse.
There were some threats that Timothy had made to Tynesha via, cell phone, text messages.
But the threatening messages were just the beginning.
Gayla told us about a time when Tim didn't want her to leave and that Tim had strangled her.
Threatening messages, physical violence, when coupled with the fact that Tim scoured his patio with bleach shortly after Tynesha's disappearance. Investigators are now wondering if perhaps Tim is behind Tynesha's disappearance after all.
There were some clues there. There was evidence of recent cleaning going on in that apartment, but we didn't have enough at that point to charge him with anything.
Investigators may not have enough evidence to charge Tim Shepard, but Tynesha's family is now convinced he's somehow involved.
I was like, this guy's gonna get away with this if I don't get these people to arrest him. And that's when I decided to call Quanell X.
He is somewhat of an activist for the African American community.
I've been the one that black men in this city have come to when they're wanted by police. And I've been able to, by God's grace, facilitate many peaceful surrenders.
In a face-to-face meeting with Quanell X, Tanisha's sister desperately pleads her family's case.
The reason I'm here to talk to you is my sister, Tanisha Stewart, has been missing.
Tanisha Stewart?
Mm-hmm.
And when's the last time you seen her?
They were adamant that they knew something had happened to her, and they were extremely terrified and worried of where was their loved one.
Her boyfriend, Tim, is the last one to see her.
Tim Shepard?
Yes, that's him.
Turns out Quanell is already familiar with Tanisha's disappearance. Tim Shepard's family had also called on him to help.
And they were asking me to get involved to help protect him from overzealous cops that were going to pin a dirty charge on him. His family saying he didn't do anything.
Unsure who to believe, Quanell X calls Tim Shepard, who agrees to a private meeting at his apartment.
Tim?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Quanell.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm freaking out, man.
When Quanell arrives, Tim is upset.
You know what I'm saying, brother, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right, Tim. And he was extremely stressed.
Is there any place that we can talk?
Just talking in the bathroom. I feel like they have my place wired or something.
Okay, let's go, Tim.
Okay.
He said he's trying to set me up. And I said, Tim, if you're innocent, I'll fight for you, brother. But if you're not innocent, brother, we need to talk about this.
Tim nervously recalls the last time he saw Tanisha.
We had a fight and she stormed out. That was the last time I saw her. I swear.
I said, brother, look me in my eye. And he put his head down like that. And then I knew there was more to the story than what he was saying. I said, Tim, look me in my eye. Tim, did you do something to this girl? And at that moment, everything changed. Everything.
In the case of missing college freshman Tanisha Stewart, some peculiar behavior, along with a series of eyewitness statements, have catapulted Tanisha's boyfriend, Tim Shepard, to the top of the suspect list. But without any physical evidence connecting Tim to any crime, bringing charges against him will be impossible. In desperation, Tanisha's family has turned to a well-known community activist named Quanell X for help. And in an emotional face-to-face meeting with Tim, Quanell seems to be on the verge of a breakthrough.
He said to me, they're gonna give me the death penalty. And I said, Tim, why would they give you the death penalty, man?
Is she dead?
Yeah.
Tim tells Quanell that when Tanisha refused to elaborate on her relationship with Mark Marks, he flew into a jealous rage.
She was messing with this guy named Mark, and...
Did y'all get into a fight?
Yeah.
And what happened?
I just went into a rage, and I killed her.
Tim tells Quanell that as Tanisha was walking out the door, he attacked her and ultimately strangled her to death.
And what'd you do with her after that?
Put her body in a dumpster.
My heart was racing, because now I've gone from trying to help this brother, possibly who's being set up by overzealous investigators, to a man who has now committed a cold-blooded killing.
After hearing Tim's confession, Quanell X relays the statement to investigator Sidney Miller. The two men, along with Miller's partner and a distraught Tim Shepard, then head to a dumpster where Tim allegedly disposed of Tanisha's body.
We're gonna be able to give this family some closure and find out what actually happened.
Believing Tanisha's body is inside the trash bin, investigator Miller calls in a CSI team. But no sooner have they started putting up the yellow tape than Tanisha's family pulls up.
He just kept saying, is she alive? Is she alive? And I said, no. I said, she's not alive. And and they all just broke down in hysterics.
I mean, it's like my heart was ripped out of my chest.
But while Tanisha's family mourns their apparent loss, CSIs make a shocking discovery. Tanisha's body isn't in the dumpster, nor for that matter is anything else.
I noticed that the dumpster, it looked like it had been recently emptied.
So now where did the dumpster go? Well, there's a landfill. It's massive.
Detectives know that in a city the size of Houston, the chances of finding Tanisha's body in a landfill are slim to none.
You have not a needle in a haystack, but you've got a needle in a stack of haystacks.
After learning that a search of the landfill would cost upwards of $500,000, a tough decision is made.
Tanisha's family talked to the sheriff and said, don't waste the money.
Making matters even more difficult is the fact that shortly after his arrest, Tim Shepard has a change of heart about his confession.
He had invoked his right to have an attorney, and at that point he didn't want to talk. But based on the information we already had, at that point, we had enough to charge him.
But with Tim's prior confession without Tanisha's body, it will be difficult to make the murder charges stick. Investigators must find more evidence in order to solidify their case. Again, they turn to the CSI team to scour Tim's apartment for additional clues.
We knew that we would be looking for microscopic evidence, so we just made sure we wouldn't leave a stone unturned.
The search pays off.
We found some bone fragments in the garbage disposal, eventually found what we later learned was enamel.
Officer Hunter, found this next to the grill.
Did you get a photograph of it?
I did.
Let's back that.
CSIs also find some charred bone fragments not far from where Tim kept his grill. The bone fragments are sent to the crime lab. While the charred remains are in too poor a condition to be positively ID'd, the enamel found in the disposal is determined to be from one of Tanisha's teeth.
I think your teeth don't go down a garbage disposal unless someone puts them down there.
Between this new evidence, the accounts of Tim's nonstop barbecuing, and reports from a fireman who saw what he thought was uncooked meat floating in Tim's bathtub, a new, more horrific picture of the crime begins to emerge.
They believe that Tanisha, she had been chopped up and incinerated.
Armed with this gruesome information, a grand jury officially indicts Tim Shepard for the murder of Tanisha Stewart. But as the case heads to trial, prosecutors know they still face an uphill battle.
That was probably the biggest hurdle, to get the jury to convict just based on the circumstantial evidence alone.
On September 29, 2008, the state of Texas versus Tim Shepard gets underway.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Tim Shepard is responsible for the death of Tanisha Stewart.
I felt a lot of pressure just because I didn't want to let Tanisha's family down, and I didn't want to let Tanisha down.
Prosecutors open by laying out the state's version of the crime. In the morning hours of March 15, 2007, Tim Shepard murdered Tanisha in his Houston apartment. To cover up the crime, Tim hacked Tanisha's body into pieces, then spent days cooking her remains over a grill before tossing them in the dumpster to cover his tracks.
There was sufficient evidence for us to put it before a jury and let them make the determination that she was in fact killed and mutilated in a gruesome manner.
As for a motive, prosecutors claim Tim would have rather seen Tanisha dead than to see her with another man.
She disrespected him because she began to move on with her life.
Tim's defense team counters that the state's theory is just that, a theory.
Regardless of what the prosecution tells you, there is no evidence.
In this case, there is no body. We felt like without a body, this would be a hurdle for the prosecution.
Even so, there was no denying the tooth fragments found inside Tim's disposal did come from Tanisha.
No person that was alive is going to quietly allow someone to extract a tooth or teeth from them and put them in a garbage disposal.
After putting forth physical evidence, prosecutors called their star witness to the stand, Quanell X.
Quanell testified where Timothy identified locations where he tossed her body after he mutilated her, and that was gripping testimony.
I asked him if he killed her, and he said yes.
Quanell's testimony is riveting. But some in the courtroom question his credibility.
He's a controversial character. He has done time for selling drugs. He has now made a name for himself for standing up for minority rights in the city.
With Quanell X's turn on the witness stand seemingly a push, prosecutors play their last card and call the defendant's own cousin, Nicholas Shepard, to the stand. What Nicholas has to say blows everyone in the courtroom away.
Nicholas testified to the fact that Timothy said he would do harm to Tynesha if it came down to it, and that if he had to kill somebody, he would cut him up and boil him.
I think the jury was a little bit surprised about what they were hearing. You could sense some shock and disbelief.
But before the final gavel falls, the defense will call a surprise witness to the stand. A witness whose story could crush the prosecution's case. A witness named Tim Shepard. Prosecutors claim that 29-year-old Tim Shepard killed his beautiful young girlfriend, Tynesha Stewart, in order to prevent her from seeing another man. Then Tim gruesomely dismembered, burned, and disposed of Tynesha's remains. Tim's attorneys counter that since police never recovered Tynesha's body, there's no proof a murder was ever committed.
How do we know she's even dead?
But Tim's own cousin, Nicholas Shepard, testifies that Tim confessed he would do just that if Tynesha ever tried to leave him.
He said if she ever left from me, he would cut her up, boil her.
The testimony of Nicholas Shepard seems to seal the deal. After 24 hours of deliberation, the jury returns with their verdict.
The jury came back with a guilty verdict of murder, and I was happy for Tynesha's mother and her family and her friends.
I was relieved because I felt like that was finally the end of the emotional roller coaster that we had all experienced within the past year.
But even with the guilty verdict, this roller coaster trial is far from over. In Texas, the official verdict can't be handed down until after the sentencing hearing, and can even be overturned during that phase of the process. And at his sentencing hearing, Tim Shepard makes a bold move and takes the stand in his own defense. Under oath, Tim claims that on the night of the crime, Tynesha was the one who was hungry for blood, and that Tim had killed her purely in self-defense.
Tim tried to make her look like she was a participant in her own death. If she wouldn't have did what she did, then maybe he wouldn't have did what he did.
Tim tells the jury that it started when he confronted Tynesha about her relationship with Mark Marks.
For a long time, I've been suspecting she's been cheating on me. I asked her about this guy named Mark. Sit down, let's just talk about it.
There's nothing to talk about.
It's a lot to talk about. What about this? Who's this Mark guy? Who is Mark?
No, Mark doesn't matter. Move.
He said that he was blocking the door so that she wouldn't leave because he wanted to work things out.
According to Tim, that's when Tynesha snapped.
She just flipped out.
He says that Tynesha grabbed some knife that was laying on a coffee table and slashed at him.
What are you doing?
Move!
Put it down!
And he grabbed her neck to keep her from stabbing or slashing at him anymore.
He said there was a brief struggle and that he blacked out. And that's all he remembers until he woke up and she wasn't breathing.
Ty.
To support Tim's testimony, his attorneys submit photographs taken of Tim's hands the night he was arrested. Photographs that suggest Tim had recently been cut by some sort of sharp object.
Tim really believed that he was defending himself and that it was an accident.
It's compelling evidence, and if the jury believes Tim's version of events, it's possible that he will spend little to no time in prison.
It just felt like a nightmare. I just couldn't believe that this was unspiraling the way that it was.
But the scales of justice tipped back in prosecutors' favor when they asked him to explain his ghastly behavior in the wake of Tynesha's death.
We talked about what he did with the parts of her body, and I asked if he put them on the barbecue pit, and he very quickly corrected me and said, no, I put her in the smoker.
To me, that's not human.
On the heels of this gruesome testimony, not only does the jury uphold the guilty verdict, but they hammer Tim with the maximum sentence possible.
Assess his punishment at confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 99 years.
They knew that a man that was capable of such a cold-blooded murder and could talk about it in such a way was dangerous and could never be trusted.
But in the minds of Tanisha's friends and family, the punishment doesn't go far enough.
I prefer him to be in a cell 24/7 with a picture of Tanisha that flashes every day, so you'll never forget why you're in here.
Tanisha's loved ones can take some comfort in the fact that Tim Shepard will never get the chance to hurt another woman again, to never take the life of someone with such intelligence, beauty, and a future of limitless possibilities. Someone like Tanisha Stewart.
Love got the best of him, and he overreacted.
The Silent Threshold, a novel based on a true tragedy. Chapter 1, The Kansas Farm Boy. Antioch, California, always felt like a place where the sun was trying to bleach the secrets out of the pavement. It was a sprawling community northeast of San Francisco, a city of 130,000 souls, caught between the industrial breath of the Delta and the quiet, dusty hills. Relis Carlisman III was a man who belonged to the soil, even if he spent his days surrounded by the hum of telecommunications equipment. He was a Kansas farm boy at heart, stoic, broad-shouldered, and possessed of a work ethic that felt like a relic from a different century. He had joined the Army straight out of high school, a boy looking for a way to serve a country he believed in, with the same simplicity he believed in the harvest. By 2016, Relis was the anchor of a house that was slowly drifting out to sea. He was a man who scraped an honest living out of a world that felt increasingly dishonest. He had 5 children, 3 girls with his current wife, Kathleen, a son named Scott from a previous marriage, and a young boy who was the light of his tired eyes. But the house on the quiet street in Antioch was not the sanctuary Relis had envisioned. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale food and the silent, vibrating tension of a marriage that had died years ago. Kathleen Ragnaby, they were estranged, living under the same roof like 2 ghosts haunting different hallways. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the logistics of child rearing and the mounting pile of bills. Relis worked. He worked until his hands were calloused and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was protective, perhaps to a fault. He hated the culture of the streets that bled into the neighborhood, the drugs, the easy violence, the waywardness of the youth. He especially hated marijuana, seeing it as the first step toward the abyss. He didn't know that the abyss was already sitting at his kitchen table. Chapter 2. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like he was made of spare parts and nervous energy. He was scrawny, short, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean in, trying to find the rhythm in his words. He was a young man who lived in the margins, rarely making eye contact, his presence in the house as unobtrusive as a shadow. But Scott was watching. While Relis was at work, Scott observed Kathleen. He saw the way she moved, the way she looked at her phone with a secret smile, and the way she treated his father with a cold, calculated disdain. To Scott, Kathleen wasn't just his stepmother. In the dark, claustrophobic theater of his mind, she was something else entirely. Scott's world was digital and hidden. He spent hours on the internet. He searches a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a psychological labyrinth. He was obsessed with the idea of a life where Relis didn't exist, a life where he could protect Kathleen, where he could be the man she actually wanted. The tension in the house was a physical thing. Relis would come home, see the disarray, the dishes piled high, the clothes scattered like fallen leaves, and the arguments would begin. Is it too much to ask for a clean house? Relis would bark, his voice a low thunder. You're never here, Relis, Kathleen would retort, her voice a jagged blade. You want a maid? Hire one with the money you don't have. Scott would listen from his room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He blamed his father. He blamed Relis for the clutter, for the unhappiness, and for the way Kathleen's eyes seemed to go dim whenever Relis entered a room. He began to search, not for jobs or for a way out, but for tools. He searched for Harrington and Richardson Point 2 to revolt. He searched for life insurance payouts. He was 21 years old, and he was planning a rebirth. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motivation. Kathleen Ragnaby was a woman who knew the value of a dollar, especially a dollar she didn't have to work for. For 10 years, she had been a drain on Relis's resources. She had affairs numerous ones and had even borne a child with another man. Yet she remained under Relis's roof, letting him pay the bills. Letting him provide the stability she refused to create herself. She was conniving, a manipulator who painted Relis as the villain to anyone who would listen. To her friends and co-workers, she was the victim of a lecherous, cheating husband. In reality, it was Relis who was being walked over. A good-hearted man who couldn't bring himself to abandon the children, even if it meant living in a domestic purgatory. But Kathleen was looking for an exit strategy. A divorce was messy and expensive. A death, however, was a different matter entirely. Relis had a life insurance policy, $1 million. She looked into the specifics of the policy, the clauses, the timeline of a payout. She didn't know that Scott was watching her searches, too. Or perhaps, in some dark, unspoken corner of their shared domestic life, they were moving in a silent, synchronized dance toward the same conclusion. Chapter 4. The Day the Sun Went. Cold. June 25, 2016, started like any other Saturday. The California heat was already rising by 10 in the morning. Kathleen took the two youngest children out for a day of shopping, a routine escape from the house. Relis was home. He was always home on the weekends, trying to catch up on the repairs that never stayed fixed. Scott was with his friends down the street, playing video games. It was his routine, his alibi. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Scott felt the pull of the house. He told his friends he had to return the family car. He promised he'd be back in 10 minutes. He didn't go back in 10 minutes. Scott parked the car a block away, avoiding the cameras he knew were there, avoiding the eyes of the neighbors. He walked toward the house, his scrawny frame hidden under a hoodie despite the heat. In his pocket was an H&R Model 999 revolver, an antiquated piece of machinery, a top-break 9-shot .22 caliber that felt heavy and cold against his leg. He entered through the garage. Relis was there, or perhaps he met Scott at the threshold of the kitchen. "What are you doing back?" Relis might have asked. Maybe he smelled the faint, skunky odor of marijuana on Scott's clothes. Maybe he started the lecture one last time. "Are you high again?" "I told you, Scott, not in this house. You're out of here if I catch you again." Relis, ever the father, ever the man who didn't see his own son as a threat, turned his back. He walked toward the kitchen, his mind probably already on the next task, the next bill, the next argument. Scott raised the revolver. The .22 is a small bullet. It's used for target practice, for small rodents. It's a quiet caliber, but at close range, it is absolute. Scott pulled the trigger. The first shot missed. Or perhaps it was the second one. Bullet went wild, punching a clean, straight hole through the television hanging on the living room wall. But the other found its mark. It struck Relis in the back of the head, right at the base of the skull. The Kansas farm boy collapsed in the threshold between the garage and the kitchen. There was no struggle. There was only this sudden, violent intrusion of lead into a brain that had spent 45 years trying to solve the problems of a family that didn't want him. Scott didn't stay to watch him die. He ran. He ran back to the car, fumbling with the revolver. As he tried to clear the spent casings, his hands shaking, one of the small brass shells fell into the spare tire well of the trunk. He drove back to his friends. He played video games. He bought condoms he didn't need, with money he didn't have, trying to create a timeline of normalcy. Chapter 5. The Return. When Kathleen returned with the children, the house was silent. It was her daughter Amia who found him first. Her scream was a jagged tear in the suburban quiet. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran in. She saw Relis on the floor. There was blood, so much blood coagulated on the linoleum. Brain matter was splattered against the doorframe. She called 911, her voice hysterical. "Is he alive? Am I? Is he alive?" Officer Ramirez was the first to arrive. He walked into a scene of chaos outside and a scene of grisly stillness inside. At first, he thought it was an accident. Relis was a big man. Maybe he'd had a stroke, hit his head on the counter, and bled out. The EMTs arrived, preparing to transport the body. But as they lifted Relis by his feet, something fell from his clothing. Something small, something metallic. Officer Ramirez knelt down. He looked at the small, mangled piece of lead. "That's a bullet fragment," he whispered. The medical call became a homicide investigation in the blink of an eye. Chapter 6. The Detectives. Corporal James Colley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez were the hunters sent into the ruins of the Eastman family. Colley was the veteran, a man who had closed countless murder cases. Gonzalez was the newer detective, sharp and hungry, with a background in property crimes. They walked through the house, noting the contrast. The outside was a nice bedroom community home. The inside was a wreck. "Not your cleanest house," Colley remarked, stepping over a pile of laundry. "Stale food, dishes everywhere. This isn't a home invasion. Nothing's missing. No forced entry." "Execution style," Gonzalez added, looking at the blood spatter, back of the head. Someone he knew, someone he let in. They started outside. In the backyard, they found a backpack. Inside was a wallet, marijuana, and the driver's license of Scott Eastman. The detectives looked at each other. The son's backpack was outside, but the son was supposedly at a friend's house. The investigation turned toward the family. They went to the hospital, where Relis lay in the ICU, a breathing tube, his only connection to the world of the living. He was brain dead, a tragedy in a hospital gown. Colley interviewed Kathleen. She was quick to point the finger at Relis's supposed side women. She painted herself as the long-suffering wife. But Colley noticed the way she talked about the insurance. He noticed the way she seemed more concerned with the payout than the man on the ventilator. Then, there was Scott. Scott came off as unassuming. Colley would later recall. Scrawny, weird cadence, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Scott told them he was at a friend's. He told them he had a strained relationship with his dad but loved his step. He lied about his phone. He lied about his money. He lied about his movements. Chapter 7. The Echo in the Machine. The break in the case didn't come from a confession. It came from an Echo ATM, a kiosk where people sell old cell phones for quick cash. Scott had told the detectives he didn't have a phone. He said he'd lost it. But Gonzalez, the property crime expert, knew about the Echo kiosks. He called the company. They had video. And there was Scott Eastman, 5 hours after his father was shot, selling a phone at a kiosk. He used the ID he claimed he didn't have. He looked into the camera with the eyes of a man who thought he was smarter than the world. The detectives recovered the phone. It was a goldmine of darkness. There were hundreds of searches for the exact weapon used, the H&R .22. There were searches for ammunition. And then, there were the mom searches. Scott's phone was filled with thousands of searches for incestuous pornography involving He had photos of Kathy Nurska, photos she had sent to other men saved on his device. The motive wasn't just money. It was a twisted, Shakespearean obsession. Scott believed that if Relis was gone, he could have the money and the woman. He believed he could step into his father's shoes in the most horrific way imaginable. Chapter 8. The Final Threshold. The arrest was a quiet affair. Despite the full gear of the police team, they went to the house. Kathleen opened the door, and the officers flooded in. "Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. Scott stood up calmly. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. As they led him away, Colley looked at Kathleen. He told her the truth, that her son was in love with her, that he'd killed his father to run off into the sunset with her. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It was bizarre, as the detectives described it. It was a look of vanity, of a woman wondering if she really was that captivating. In the end, the jury saw through the unassuming act. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she pulled the trigger, and no proof she had asked Scott to do it. She stayed in the house for a while. The $1 million eventually split among the children, excluding the one who had murdered the provider. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy who just wanted to keep his kids on track, was gone. He wouldn't walk his daughters down the aisle. He wouldn't meet his grandkids. He had brought Scott into the world, and 21 years later, Scott had taken him out of it. The house in Antioch remained, a quiet suburban shell on a quiet suburban street, holding the memory of a boy who loved his stepmother more than his father's life, and a man who was too good for the world he tried so hard to save. Epilogue. The sun still bleaches the pavement in Antioch. The Delta breeze still carries the scent of salt and industry. And in a California prison, Scott Eastman sits in a cell, a scrawny man with a weird cadence, waiting for a sunset that will never come. The Weight of Whispers. A novel of obsession and betrayal in Antioch. Prologue. The Golden State's shadow. Antioch, California, was a city built on the promises of the sun. Situated northeast of San Francisco, It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to believe in the American dream, a bedroom community where the lawns were mostly green. The schools were supposedly good, and the fog of the bay stayed just far enough away. But the sun in Antioch was different. It didn't just illuminate, it baked. It drew the moisture out of the earth and the patience out of its people. And for Relis Eastman, the sun was a constant reminder of the farm he had left behind in Kansas. He was a man of the soil who had traded the plains for the suburbs, the army for telecommunications, and a quiet life for a house full of secrets. On June 25, 2016, the heat was particularly stifling. It was a day that felt like a held breath of silence that was about to break. Chapter 1: The House on the Corner. The Eastman home looked unremarkable from the curb. It was a sturdy house, the kind a hard-working man provides for his wife and 5 children. Relis Eastman was that man. At 55, he was the pillar of the household, a workaholic, a provider, and a disciplinarian whose moral compass was as rigid as a military barracks. But inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stagnation. Kathleen Rognaby sat in the living room, watching the dust motes dance in the light. She was Relis's wife, but the term felt like a title she had outgrown years ago. Their marriage was a ghost ship drifting, hollow, and kept afloat only by the shared roof and the children. They slept in separate rooms. They spoke in transactions. Kathleen was a woman who moved through the house like a trapped bird. She was beautiful in a way that seemed weary, her eyes always searching for an exit. For 10 years, she had lived under Relis's shadow, resenting his rules, his frugality, and his refusal to see the woman she had become. She had sought solace in other arms, other men, even bearing a child that wasn't his. Yet, they remained locked in this domestic purgatory. "Mom, can we go?" It was Amia, her daughter. Kathleen blinked, pulling herself back from the edge of a dark thought. "Yes," Kathleen said, her voice a dry rasp. "Let's go shopping. We need to get out of this house." As they left, Kathleen didn't look back. She didn't see the figure watching from the upstairs window. Scott Eastman, Relis's 21-year-old son from a previous marriage, watched his stepmother walk to the car. Scott was a scrawny young man with a gaze that lingered too long. To the world, he was just a quiet kid who played too many video games and smoked a bit of marijuana. But inside Scott's mind, a storm was brewing. He didn't see Kathleen as a mother. He saw her as a prize. He saw her as a woman trapped by a tyrant. The same tyrant who demanded Scott get a job, stop the drugs, and be a man. In Scott's twisted reality, Relis wasn't a father. He was an obstacle. Chapter 2: The Return. The shopping trip lasted all day. Kathleen moved through the stores with a frantic energy, buying things they didn't need with money they didn't really have. It was a way to feel alive, to feel like she had some control. By the time they returned to the quiet street in Antioch, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows over the driveways. Amia ran ahead, the front door swinging open. Kathleen followed, her arms full of bags. Then came the scream. It wasn't a scream of annoyance or a child's tantrum. It was the sound of primal terror. Kathleen dropped the bags, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped animal. "Mom, what is going on?" Amia shrieked, her face pale as a sheet. Kathleen's young son looked at her, his eyes wide, his voice trembling. "Mom, there's blood everywhere." Kathleen pushed past them, her feet heavy as lead. She reached the threshold of the kitchen, and the world stopped. There, lying in the doorway between the garage and the kitchen, was Relis. He was face down, his body unnaturally still. A dark, thick pool of red was spreading across the linoleum, reaching for the cabinets like a rising tide. "Relis," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't answer. She didn't go to him. She couldn't. The smell of copper and something metallic filled the air. She turned, her instincts screaming for her to get the children out. She ran to the phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. 911. "What is your emergency?" "My husband. He's on the floor. There's blood. Is he alive? Oh God. Is he alive?" Kathleen's voice was a jagged mess of sobs and gasps. The dispatcher's voice was a calm anchor in a sea of chaos. "Ma'am, stay right there. Help is on the way. Can you go to him? Can you help him?" "No," Kathleen cried, stepping back into the sunlight of the front yard, where the air was hot but clean. "I don't want to go in there. I can't." Chapter 3: The Uniform and the Unknown. Officer Ramirez was the first on the scene. He had been across town when the call came in, a medical emergency. possibly a fall. But as he pulled up to the Eastman house and saw the family huddled on the lawn, their faces masks of horror, he knew this was something else. He walked through the front door, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. Mr. Eastman. He turned into the kitchen and stopped. He had seen death before, but the sheer volume of blood was staggering. It was coagulated, thick, and in the center of it, he could see something that didn't belong on a kitchen floor. Brain matter. He knelt beside the man. To his shock, he heard a faint, wet rattle. "We got you. Hang in there, buddy," Ramirez whispered. The EMTs arrived shortly after. At first, the working theory was a tragic accident. A man of 55, perhaps a heart attack, a fall against the sharp edge of the counter. It happened. But as they lifted Relis's limp body onto the gurney, his shirt rode up. Ramirez leaned in closer. There, embedded in the flesh at the base of the skull, was a small, jagged piece of metal. "Wait," Ramirez said, his voice cold. Everyone stopped. He looked at the tiny entry wound. It was clean, precise. "That's a bullet fragment," he said to the room. The medical emergency was over. The homicide investigation had begun. Chapter 4. The Detectives. Corporal James Colley was a man who lived for the hunt, a veteran homicide detective with the Antioch Police Department. He was used to the midnight calls that tore him away from his own life. When his phone vibrated on the nightstand, he didn't need to check the ID. He arrived at the scene and met his partner for the case, Adrian Gonzalez. Gonzalez was newer, a property crimes detective whom Colley was mentoring. "What do we have?" Colley asked, stepping under the yellow crime scene tape. "Relis Eastman," Gonzalez replied, "shot in the back of the head. He's at the ICU, but it doesn't look good. The house is, well, you should see for yourself." They walked inside. The contrast between the tidy exterior and the interior was jarring. The house was in a state of advanced neglect. Stale food sat on the counters. Piles of laundry were strewn across the furniture. It was the home of people who had given up on the details. "Look at the TV," Colley noted, pointing to the living room wall. There was a hole in the screen, a perfect, circular punct. "Straightened shot," Colley mused. "Small caliber, maybe a .22. It's a target gun, a rodent gun, not usually what you see in an execution-style hit. Unless the shooter didn't want a loud noise," Gonzalez added. They walked the perimeter, the flashlight beams cutting through the dark. In the backyard, near the fence, something caught Gonzalez's eye, a backpack. He zipped it open. Inside were clothes, a pipe, a small bag of marijuana, and a wallet. He flipped the wallet open and pulled out a driver's license. "Scott Eastman," Gonzalez read. "The son." Colley looked at the house. A son's backpack in the yard while the father is shot in the kitchen. That's not a coincidence. That's a lead. Chapter 5. The Icy Veins of Greed. As Relis lay brain-dead in the hospital, his life supported only by the rhythmic hum of a ventilator, the detectives began to peel back the layers of the Eastman family. They started with Kathleen. She sat in the interview room, her eyes He was a difficult man, she told Colley. He cheated. He had women on the side. Our marriage was over a long time ago. He discovered that Relis was the one paying the bills, keeping the roof over her head despite her betrayals. Then came the call from the hospital social worker. "Detective," the worker said, her voice hushed. "The family is asking about the life insurance. Specifically, Kathleen. She seems very eager to know when he can be declared dead. The policy was worth $1 million. A million reasons to pull the trigger," Colley whispered to Gonzalez. But Kathleen had an alibi. She was shopping. She was with the kids. She was on camera miles away at the time of the shooting. She couldn't have pulled the trigger. "So who did?" Gonzalez asked. "The boyfriend a hired hit. Or someone closer," Colley said, his thoughts returning to the backpack in the yard. Chapter 6. The Sickness in the Silence. Scott Eastman was brought in for questioning. He was a scrawny kid who wouldn't meet their eyes. He spoke in a strange, halting cadence, his fingers twitching in his lap. "I use marijuana," Scott admitted when confronted with the backpack. "I leave it outside so my dad won't see it. He hates drugs. He'd kick me out if he knew." "Where were you that night, Scott?" Colley asked, leaning in. "With friends, playing video games. I left for a bit to return the car. My dad doesn't like me driving at night." "Did you see him?" "No. I parked a block away and walked back to my friend's house. I didn't want him to catch me out. It was a plausible story, the kind a rebellious son tells a strict father. But as the interview progressed, Scott began to slip. He mentioned buying a box of condoms at a store. With what money? Scott Gonzalez asked. Your wallet was in the backpack, in the backyard. Scott froze. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I had some cash, Scott stammered. I saw an Echo ATM. Gonzalez's ears perked up. He knew about Echo ATM kiosks, where you can sell your phone for instant cash. Why mention the ATM, Scott? No reason, just saw it. After Scott left, Gonzalez didn't go home. He went to the Echo ATM. And there he was, Scott Eastman, hours before the murder, selling a cell phone he claimed he didn't have, using an ID he claimed was in his lost wallet. They recovered the phone from the machine. When the forensic team cracked the data, the romance of the Eastman house was finally revealed in all its grotesque detail. Chapter 7. The Harvest of Horror. The phone was a window into a nightmare. Jesus, Gonzalez said, staring at the screen in the darkened precinct. The search history wasn't just about guns, though. It was filled with hundreds of searches for H&R .22 revolvers and ballistics of a .22 to the head. It was the other searches that turned Gonzalez's stomach. Hundreds of searches for incestuous pornography, specifically stepmother fantasies. Scott hadn't just been a lonely kid. He was a man consumed by an obsessive, delusional love for Kathleen. He had saved the risque photos she sent to other men onto his own phone. He had convinced himself that if Relis were gone, the $1 million would be theirs. He and Kathleen would run away together. He would be the man she truly wanted. He didn't kill his father for the money, Kali realized, looking at the data. He killed his father to save his stepmother. He thought this was a love story. They checked the neighbor's surveillance footage. It showed Scott's car parking at 8:53 p.m. It showed him walking toward the house, not away from it. It showed him returning minutes later, fumbling with the trunk of the car, likely hiding the antique H&R 999 revolver. The romance was a delusion born of isolation in a broken mind. Chapter 8. The Arrest. The arrest was a silent affair. The police arrived at the house in full gear. Kathleen opened the door, her face a mask of confusion. "Where's Scott?" Callie asked. The young man stood up from the couch. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked almost relieved, as if the weight of the secret was finally too much for his scrawny shoulders to bear. As they led him away in handcuffs, Callie turned to Kathleen. "You know he's in love with you, right?" Callie said, his voice flat. "He did this for you. He thought you'd run off into the sunset together on Relis's blood money." Kathleen didn't cry. She didn't scream in horror. She simply looked at the door where Scott had disappeared, a strange, unreadable expression on her face, a look that was almost vanity. "Did he really say that?" she whispered. Epilogue. The cost of the dream. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He would spend the rest of his days in a concrete box, far from the son of Antioch and the woman he had murdered for. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she had asked him to do it. No proof she had manipulated the boy's fractured mind. She walked away with a portion of the insurance money, moving on to a new life, leaving the wreckage of the Eastman family behind. Relis's daughters were left with a hole that no amount of money could fill. "I won't have my dad to walk me down the aisle," one of them said during the trial. "I won't have him." In the end, Antioch remained a town of 130,000 people. The sun continued to bake the earth, and the houses on the corners continued to hold their secrets. But for the Eastmans, the silence was finally absolute. The romance was dead, the father was gone, and the son was a ghost in a cage. Murder is never a love story. It is only the end of one. The Fragile Threshold. A novel of Antioch. Chapter 1. The House of Static. The sun in Antioch does not merely shine. It is a dry, relentless heat that bakes the suburban streets until the asphalt ripples like a mirage. On the outside, the Eastman house on Bigelow Drive looked like any other beige sanctuary of middle-class normalcy. But inside, the air was heavy with the scent of unwashed dishes and the static electricity of a dying marriage. Relis Eastman was a man built from the red dirt of Kansas. He carried the prairie in his get a steady, unyielding rhythm that didn't fit the frantic pace of Northern California. He was a man of wires and signals, a telecommunications worker who spent his days ensuring the world could talk to itself. while he returned home to a house where no one spoke to him. Kathleen Rognaby moved through the house like a ghost who still held the keys to the pantry. She was beautiful in a way that felt tired, a sharp-edged beauty that had been honed by years of disappointment. They slept in separate rooms, now a tactical withdrawal. The hallway between their doors was a no-man's land, a DMZ where the only things exchanged were cold glances and the occasional, biting remark about bills or the children. In the shadows of this domestic Cold War sat Scott. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like a stiff breeze could knock him into the next county. He was scrawny, with eyes that seemed to perceive a different frequency of reality. He was Relis's son from a previous life, a relic of a time before the silence took over. To Relis, Scott was a disappointment wrapped in a haze of marijuana smoke. To Scott, Relis was the Great Wall of Antioch that stood between him and the only light he knew. That light was Kathleen. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Orchard. Scott's love for his stepmother was not the clean, wholesome love of a son. It was a fever. It was a jagged, desperate thing that grew in the dark corners of his mind, fueled by the risque photos he found on her phone, and the way she looked at him with a pity that he mistook for affection. He watched her from the edges of rooms. He memorized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was stressed about money. He saw the way she manipulated Relis, the way she bled him dry, as the neighbors would later whisper. But in Scott's eyes, Kathleen was a captive. She was a queen trapped in a tower of unwashed laundry and unpaid invoices, and Relis was the jailer. "He doesn't appreciate you," Scott would whisper to the empty air of his bedroom, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Late at night, while the rest of the house hummed with the sound of the air conditioner, Scott's face was illuminated by the blue glow of his monitor. His search history was a map of his descent. Harrington and Richardson, ballistics of a .2, life insurance payout timeline. And then, the darker searches, the ones that made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. The fantasies of a world where Relis was gone, where the $1 million policy landed in Kathleen's lap, and where she would finally see Scott not as a scrawny kid, but as her savior, her partner, her everything. Chapter 3. The Price of a Soul. Kathleen wasn't an innocent bystander in the wreckage of their lives. She was a woman who had learned that beauty was a currency, and she was spending it as fast as she could. She was researching the insurance policy 3 weeks before the end. She sat at the same kitchen table where Relis ate his lonely breakfasts, clicking through the clauses of his mortality. $1 million. It was a number that could buy a new life. It could buy a life away from the ledge she called her husband. It could buy a life where she didn't have to sleep in a separate room. She didn't ask Scott to do it, not in so many words, but in the quiet moments, in the way she complained about Relis, in the way she leaned on Scott's shoulder when she cried about their marital problems. She was planting seeds in a very fertile, very broken mind. She had an alibi. She had the children. She had a shopping trip planned. She was a master of the exit strategy. Chapter 4. The Threshold. June 25, 2016. The heat was a physical weight. Relis was in the garage. He liked the garage. It was the one place where the chaos of the house couldn't reach him. But then he saw Scott. "Are you high again?" Relis's voice was like gravel. Scott stood there, his hand trembling in his pocket. The Harrington and Richardson 999 NNT, a relic, much like his father was heavy. It was a break-top revolver, a piece of history intended for target practice, for small rodents. "Don't lie to me," Relis said, turning his back. It was the ultimate insult, the turning of the back. It was the sign that Relis no longer even feared his son. He was just tired of him. Relis walked toward the threshold of the kitchen. He was going to get a glass of water. He was going to continue his life of quiet desperation. Scott followed. The world narrowed to the back of his father's head. The Kansas farm boy, who had survived the army, survived the cutthroat world of telecommunications, but couldn't survive the rot inside his own home. Shazam, Scott thought, though he didn't say it. Everything changes now. The .22 is a small bullet. It doesn't make a loud noise. It's a polite kind of murder. One shot. The threshold of the kitchen became a slaughterhouse. Blood and brain mattered the physical substance of Relis's thoughts. His memories of Kansas, his love for his daughters splattered against the doorframe. Relis fell. He didn't die immediately. He was a workaholic to the end. His heart kept beating, trying to finish the job of living even as his brain was shattered. Chapter 5. The Echoes of Antioch. Detective Kali arrived to a scene of domestic horror masked as a medical accident. The pool of blood was coagulated, a thick, dark lake on the linoleum. He must have hit his head, the EMTS said. But Kali saw the fragment, a piece of lead that didn't belong in a kitchen. From that moment, the medical call became a hunt. They found the backpack in the yard, Scott's ID, a trail of breadcrumbs left by a boy who wanted to be caught, perhaps, or a boy who was too scrawny in spirit to cover his tracks. At the hospital, Relis lay on a ventilator. He was brain dead, a machine doing the work his son had ended. Kathleen sat by the bed, the grieving widow, already calculating the $1 million payout. She signed the papers to pull the plug with a steady hand. It was the final divorce. Chapter 6. The Kiosk of Secrets. Detective Gonzalez was the cell phone guru. He knew that in the 21st century, our souls are stored in silicon. Scott had sold his phone to an Echo ATM, a kiosk for stolen and discarded dreams. When Gonzalez opened that machine, he found the map of Scott's madness, the searches for the gun, the searches for the ammo, and the hundreds of searches for his stepmother, the incestuous fantasies that turned a murder into a Shakespearean tragedy of the suburbs. "I like you the best," Scott Cully said in the interrogation room, his voice a velvet trap. "I know you feel best when you're being honest." But Scott's voice became meek and little. He looked like a cornered cat. He realized that the sunset he wanted to run off into with Kathleen was actually a neon light in a prison cell. Chapter 7. The Sunset That Never Came. The arrest was loud, banging on the door, police in full gear, the shattering of the last illusions. "You know he's in love with you," Callie told Kathleen as they led Scott away in irons. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror, it was bizarre, a flicker of pride, a moment of realization that she had been that powerful, that she could turn a son against a father, with nothing but a few risque photos and $1 million dream. She was never charged. There was no paper trail for a broken heart or a manipulative glance. She got the insurance money, split with the children. She got her freedom. Scott got 55 years. In the end, Relis Eastman was a good man who worked too hard for a family that didn't want him. And Scott was a boy who thought a bullet could bridge the distance between a lonely bedroom and a stepmother's embrace. Antioch remains hot. The sun still punishes the streets. And on Bigelow Drive, the threshold of the kitchen is clean. But the echoes of that point to two shots still ring in the silence of the night. Epilogue. The daughter's grief. Amia will never have a father to walk her down the aisle. She won't have him to meet her children. She is left with the memory of the straggle look on her brother's face and the blood on the floor. The money is there, in the bank, cold and silent. $1 million. The price of a father, the cost of a fantasy, the bitter end of the Eastman line. Shadows of Devotion. The Antioch Tragedy. Prologue. The sound of glass shattering. The California sun was a relentless judge, beating down on the asphalt of Antioch with a dry, unforgiving heat. For Kathleen Rognaby, the day had been an exercise in the mundane shopping bags filled with the necessities of a family of 7, the mindless chatter of her children, and the lingering weight of a marriage that had long since turned into a hollow shell. She didn't know, as she pulled the car into the driveway of their home on Bigelow Drive, that the world she had carefully manipulated for a decade was about to implode. The silence of the house was the first warning. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a resting home. It was a heavy, stagnant quiet that smelled of copper and stale air. Then came the scream. It was Amia. Her voice, usually bright and youthful, was a jagged shard of glass cutting through the afternoon. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen stepped through the threshold, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her young son stood near the kitchen, his face a mask of primal confusion. His eyes were wide, reflecting a horror he couldn't name. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's blood everywhere." In that moment, the romanticized version of her life, the one she had built on a foundation of secrets and psych, in its place was the cold, hard reality of a kitchen floor slick with the lifeblood of Relis Eastman. Chapter 1. The Farm Boy and the Siren. To understand the end, one must look at the beginning. Relis Eastman was a man carved from the soil of Kansas. He carried the discipline of the farm and the rigidity of the U.S. Army in his spine. He was a man of simple truths, hard work, providing for one's family, and an absolute intolerance for the rot of the modern world, specifically the drugs and lawlessness that seeped into the edges of Antioch. He was a provider, a telecommunications worker, who saw himself as the pillar of a large, sprawling family. But pillars, no matter how strong, can be eroded by a slow, persistent poison. That poison was the state of his marriage to Kathleen. Years ago, their union might have been described as a whirlwind. Kathleen was the contrast to his stoicism, vibrant, perhaps a bit chaotic, and possessing a magnetic pull that Relis, for all his military discipline, couldn't resist. But by 2016, the magnetism had become a trap. They lived under the same roof, but they were strangers navigating a minefield. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the logistics of a household in disarray. Outside, the house looked like any other in the suburban community. Inside, it was a testament to a domestic war of attrition. Dishes piled high, clothes scattered like casualties, and the smell of neglect permeated every room. Kathleen had begun to paint Relis as the villain in her own internal narrative. She spoke of him as a lech, a man with women on the side, a husband who failed to see her. Whether these were truths or the justifications of a woman already looking for an exit was a question only the shadows of that house could answer. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Obsession. In the corner of this fractured home lived Scott Eastman. At 21, Scott was a ghost in his own life. Scrawny, awkward, and possessing a cadence of speech that made people look twice. He was the son Relis struggled to understand. Relis wanted a man of iron. He got a boy of smoke. Scott's world was one of video games, low-level marijuana use, and a secret, burning devotion that would eventually consume them all. He didn't look at Kathleen as a stepmother. He watched the way she moved through the house, the way she manipulated his father, and the way she seemed to be the only source of light in his dim existence. His love wasn't a noble kind found in the novels he didn't read. It was a dark, obsessive hunger. It was a romance born of isolation and fueled by the toxic dynamics of a house, where the lines between family and stranger had blurred. On his phone, hidden behind passwords and layers of digital deception, Scott curated a world where he and Kathleen were the protagonists. He searched for things he couldn't say, allowed pornography that mirrored his own domestic situation, incestuous fantasies that bridged the gap between his reality and his desires. He believed, in the delusional heights of his obsession, that if the obstacle his father were removed, the $1 million insurance policy and the woman of his dreams would be his. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motive. The air in the household grew thinner in June. Kathleen had begun her own research. While she played the role of the frustrated wife, her browser history told a different story. She was having an affair up. The detectives would later find the risque photos she sent to other men, the secret threads of a life Relis knew nothing about. She was a woman in the middle of a transition, waiting for the right moment to flip the script. Whether she and Scott ever spoke of it in the dark hallways is a mystery. Did they share a look over the dinner table? Did she know the depth of the Shazam transformation occurring within her stepson? Scott wasn't just playing video games anymore. He was visiting auction sites. He was searching for a specific tool, a Harrington and Richardson model, an antiquated revolver, a relic of a different era much like his father's values. He was searching for .22 caliber ammunition, reading about what such a small bullet could do to the human brain. The romance was now a conspiracy of intent. Chapter 4. The Final Walkthrough. June 25, 2016. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over the streets of Antioch. Scott told his friends he was going to return the car to his dad. He said Relis was strict about him driving at night. It was a half-truth, the best kind of lie. He parked the car a block away, near a street called Big. He didn't walk toward his friend's house as he would later claim. He walked toward home. He walked toward the garage where he knew his father would be. The confrontation was likely brief. Relis, ever the disciplinarian, probably saw Scott and felt the usual flash of disappointment. He might have asked. Relis turned his back. It was a gesture of dismissal, a sign that he didn't view his son as a threat. He walked toward the threshold of the kitchen, toward the center of his kingdom. Scott followed. He didn't use a powerful weapon. He used the .22, the target practice gun he had researched for weeks. One shot. The sound was likely muffled by the walls of the house, a small pop that ended the life of a Kansas farm boy. Relis fell in the threshold, his life spilling onto the floor. He had worked so hard to keep under his feet. Brain matter and blood, the physical evidence of a shattered dream, splattered against the doorframe. Scott didn't stay. He ran. He ran back to the car, fumbled with the antiquated revolver, and in his haste, a spent casing fell into the spare tire, well, a tiny, brass witness to his crime. Chapter 5. The Dance of the Detectives. Corporal James Coley and Detective Adrian Gonzalez were the men tasked with unweaving the web. When they first walked into the Eastman home, they didn't see a murder scene. They saw a medical call. He must have hit his head, the EMTs thought. But the bullet fragment found on Relis's back changed everything. Suddenly, the messy house wasn't just a sign of poor housekeeping. It was a crime scene. Kali was the veteran, the man who had seen 1,000 ways people hurt each other. Gonzalez was the cell phone guru, the man who understood that in the 21st century, our ghosts live in our pockets. Their investigation was a slow burn. They talked to Kathleen, who played the grieving, frustrated wife with practiced ease. She had an ironclad alibi. She was shopping with the kids. She was the picture of innocence, despite the $1 million motive lurking in the background. Then there was Scott, the scrawny kid who couldn't make eye contact. He told them about the condoms he bought, about the lost cell phone, about the ATM machine. Why would you randomly say you exited neither? Gonzalez wondered. It was the slip that broke the case. Chapter 6. The Mountain of Phones. The Echo ATM was a kiosk for selling old phones. To Scott, it was a graveyard where he could bury his secrets. To Gonzalez, it was a gold mine. The detectives stood before the machine, the unmanned kiosk that had recorded Scott's face, as he sold the phone he claimed didn't exist. When the bin popped open, it was a literal mountain of cell phones. They dug, they searched, and then they found it. When Gonzalez plugged that phone into his forensic software, the romance Scott had built in his head was laid bare. The hundreds of searches for the H&R 9, the searches for the exact ammo used, and then the mom searches. The risque photos of Kathleen, the incestuous fantasies, the twisted devotion that had transformed a scrawny kid into a cold-blooded killer. Scott hadn't killed for money alone. He had killed for the queen of his dark castle. He believed that by removing the king, he could finally claim the throne. Chapter 7. The arrest was not a scene from an action movie. It was a quiet, devastating end. When Callie confronted Scott with the search history, the boy's voice turned meek. The body language that had been nervous became small. "I need a lawyer," Scott whispered. The game was over. Back at the house, the police arrived in full gear. Kathleen stood by as they handcuffed her stepson. "You know he's in love with you," Callie told her. The look on Kathleen's face was bizarre. It wasn't horror. It wasn't grief. It was a moment of realization, perhaps a flicker of pride, or perhaps the chilling understanding that her own manipulations had created a monster she could no longer control. Relis Eastman died in the ICU, his family eventually pulling the plug to claim the $1 million he had worked his whole life to provide. Epilogue. The Echoes of Antioch. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He traded the house on Bigelow for a cell in the California penal system. His romance ended not with a sunset, but with a steel door. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she pulled the trigger, only that she had set the stage. She walked away with her share of the insurance money, a woman who had survived the storm she helped create. The daughters were left with the wreckage. No father to walk them down the aisle, no grandfather for the children. Just the memory of a man who came from the farms of Kansas to die on a kitchen floor in Antioch, betrayed by the very people he sought to protect. In the end, the story of the Eastmans wasn't a tragedy of crime. It was a tragedy of devotion, the kind that turns rotten when left in the dark. The kind that proves that sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who know exactly where to aim. Prologue. The heat of the valley. Antioch, California, was a city that breathed in the dust of the Delta and exhaled the weary sighs of 100,000 commuters. It was a place where the suburban dream often went to die under the blistering sun of the East Bay. To the outside world, the house on Bigelow Drive was just another beige box in a neighborhood of beige boxes. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of unwashed dishes, stale grievances, and a rot that had nothing to do with the food left on the counters. Relis Eastman was a man built of Kansas soil and military discipline. He was a pillar of granite in a house made of shifting sand. He believed in hard work, the American flag, and the sanctity of a home free from the poison of drugs. But Relis was a man blinded by his own integrity. He didn't see the shadows lengthening in the corners of his own living room. He didn't see that the woman he shared his life with was a stranger, or that the son he had raised was harboring a darkness that would eventually swallow them both. Chapter 1. The Siren of Bigelow Drive. Kathleen Ragnaby was a woman of many masks. To Relis, she was the wife he couldn't quite reach any more than mother of his younger children, a woman who had once brought color to his farm boy world. But to the rest of Antioch, and to the men she met in the dim light of digital screens, she was something else entirely. She moved through the cluttered house like a ghost, her eyes always fixed on her phone. The house was a disaster laundry piled like mountain ranges in the hallways, dishes crusted with the remnants of last week's meals. Relis worked himself to the bone at the telecommunications company to provide for 5 children, but the more he brought home, the more Kathleen bled him dry. He stayed for the children. He stayed because he was a man who didn't know how to quit, even when the battle was already lost. Relis, the bills are due, she would say, her voice a flat, demanding monotone, never looking up from the risque photos she was sending to a lover across town. I just gave you the paycheck, Kathleen, Relis would sigh, leaning against the kitchen threshold, the very spot where his life would eventually end. He was a good-hearted man, a man who believed that if he just worked a little harder, if he was just a little more protective, the family would hold together. He didn't know that the foundation was already gone. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Room. Scott Eastman was a shadow. At 21, he was scrawny, awkward, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean away, as if trying to decipher a code that didn't want to be cracked. He lived in the gaps of the household, moving between his father's rigid rules and his own hazy reality of marijuana smoke and video games. But Scott had a secret that burned hotter than the weed he smoked in the backyard. He didn't look at Kathleen as a stepmother. To him, she was the only light in a world that felt cold and judgmental. He watched her from the doorways. He watched the way she moved, the way she ignored his father, the way she seemed to be a prisoner in this house just like him. His obsession wasn't born of love, it was born of a warped, incestuous fantasy. In the dark of his room, his fingers flew across his phone screen, searching for things that would make a sane man recoil. He didn't want to be Kathleen's son. He wanted to be the man who rescued her. He wanted to be the man who replaced Reed. "Dad is too hard on you," Scott would whisper to her when Relis was at work. Kathleen would give him a half-smile, a manipulative glint in her eye. She knew Scott was her most loyal soldier. She used him to hide her tracks, to run her errands, to be the buffer between her and the man who paid the bills. She didn't realize she was playing with a fire that was preparing to consume the entire house. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motivation. The turning point came in the form of a piece of paper, a life insurance policy. $1 million. To Kathleen, it was a ticket out of the clutter, out of Antioch, and away from the man she had grown to loathe. To Scott, it was the dowry for a future that only existed in his twisted mind. If Relis was gone, the money would be theirs, the house would be theirs, the world would finally be quiet. 3 weeks before the end, the digital trail began. Scott's phone became a log of a murder in progress. Harrington and Richardson pointed to revolver. Ballistics of a .22 long rifle bullet. How to kill someone instantly. He searched with the clinical detachment of a man planning a grocery list. He looked at gun auction sites, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen as he visualized the weight of the antique revolver in his hand. He wasn't a killer yet, but the transition was happening in the silence of his friend's house, between rounds of video games. Chapter 4. The Day the World Stopped. June 25, 2016. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the asphalt of Antioch. Kathleen had taken the younger children out. She was building her fortress on ironclad alibi of receipts, shopping bags, and public appearances. She was miles away, a perfect mother on a perfect Saturday. Relis was home. He was in the garage, perhaps tinkering with something, perhaps just enjoying a moment of silence in a house that was rarely quiet. Scott arrived. He parked his car a block away, tucked into the shadows of Bigelow Drive. He walked toward the house, the .22 revolver heavy in his pocket. This was the moment Shazam. The scrawny kid was stepping into the role of the executioner. Relis saw him. "Scott, are you high again? I told you, if I catch you with that stuff, you're out." Relis didn't see a threat. He saw a disappointment. He turned his back on his son, walking toward the kitchen door, toward the safety of his home. The threshold. Scott raised the revolver. It was an antiquated piece of machinery, a breaktop H&R 999. It felt like history in his hand. He pulled the trigger. The crack of the .22 was small, a sharp, pathetic sound that didn't match the magnitude of the act. The bullet found its mark, entering the back of Relis's head. Relis collapsed. He didn't die instantly. He lay on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the mess of a life he had tried so hard to fix. Brain matter and blood pooled on the linoleum, mingling with the dust and the stale air. Scott didn't stay. He ran back to his car, fumbling with the revolver, breaking it open to eject the spent casing. In his haste, the small brass cylinder bounced into the spare tire well, a tiny golden seed of his own destruction. Chapter 5. The Mask of Grief. When Kathleen returned, the screaming began. Ammia's voice pierced the neighborhood. "Mom, there's blood everywhere." Kathleen's performance was masterful. The 911 call was a symphony of hysteria. "Is he alive? I don't want to go in there. I'm scared." She stood outside with her children as the police arrived. She was the grieving wife, the shocked partner, but behind her eyes, the gears were turning. $1 million. It was almost within reach. Detective James Carley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez didn't see a grieving family. They saw a puzzle that didn't fit. The house was a state of disarray, a contrast to the clean-cut military man lying in a pool of his own life force. "This wasn't a robbery," Carley whispered, looking at the TV. "A single bullet hole, straight in a .2, a target pistol, a small, intimate choice of weapon." The investigation began like a slow-motion car crash. They found the backpack in the yard. Scott's eyed marijuana. "I leave it outside so Dad doesn't get mad," Scott said, his voice a weird cadence, his eyes avoiding theirs. He looked like a cornered cat, but he was playing the part of the dim-witted son. Chapter 6. The Digital Ghost. The break came from an Echo ATM, a kiosk for selling old phones. Scott thought he was being clever. He sold his phone 5 hours before the murder. He thought that by getting rid of the device, he was getting rid of the evidence. He didn't realize the kiosk was a fortress of cameras. Detective Gonzalez, the cell phone guru, found the device. He plugged it in, and the ghost of Scott Eastman's mind poured out onto the screen. The searches for the H&R 9, the searches for the ammo, and then the mom searches. The detectives sat in silence as the hundreds of searches for incestuous pornography flashed before them. It wasn't just a murder for money. It was a murder for a twisted version of love. Scott believed that if Relis was dead, he and Kathleen could run off into the sunset. He had killed his father to win a woman who didn't even see him as a person. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The arrest wasn't a movie scene. It was a grim necessity. They went to the house in full gear. Kathleen opened the door an inch before the police surged in. "Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. Scott stood up calmly. "I'm right here." As they led him away, Detective Callie looked at Kathleen. He told her the truth, that Scott had done it for her, that he was in love with her. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It was bizarre, a flicker of vanity, a moment of realization that her manipulation had worked too well. She was never charged. There was no proof she pulled the strings, only that she had created the environment where such a monster could grow. Epilogue. The Cost of Justice. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He vanished into the California penal system, a shadow finally reunited with the dark. The insurance money was split among the children minus the murderous one. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy, was gone. His daughter would never have him to walk her down the aisle. His grandkids would never know the man who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over a family that didn't deserve him. In Antioch, the sun still beats down on Bigelow Drive. The houses still look the same from the outside, beige boxes under a blue sky, but the neighbors know. They know that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't the drugs on the street or the criminals in the night. Sometimes the monster is sitting at your kitchen table, eating your food, and waiting for the sun to go down. Justice was served, but it was a cold, hollow victory. Relis brought Scott into the world, and Scott took him out of it. And in the end, the only thing left was the silence of a house that was finally terribly quiet. The Silent Threshold. A novel based on a true tragedy. Chapter 1. The Kansas Farm Boy. Antioch, California, always felt like a place where the sun was trying to bleach the secrets out of the pavement. It was a sprawling community northeast of San Francisco, a city of 130,000 souls, caught between the industrial breath of the Delta and the quiet, dusty hills. To a man like Relis Carl Eastman III, it was a long way from the golden wheat fields of Kansas, but the dust was familiar. Relis was a man who belonged to the soil, even if he spent his days surrounded by the hum of telecommunications equipment and the tangled webs of fiber-optic cables. He was a Kansas farm boy at heart, stoic, broad-shouldered, and possessed of a work ethic that felt like a relic from a different century. He grew up under the vast, punishing skies of the Midwest, where the value of a man was measured by the calluses on his palms and the integrity of his word. He had joined the U.S. Army fresh out of high school, a boy looking for a way to serve a country he believed in with the same simplicity he believed in the harvest. The military had sharpened his discipline, but it had also instilled in him a rigid sense of order that would later become a source of both pride and friction in his domestic life. When he eventually settled in Antioch, taking a job with a major telecommunications firm, he brought that soldier's mindset with him. He was the provider, the protector, the silent engine that kept the family moving forward. By 2016, however, Relis was the anchor of a house that was slowly drifting out to sea. He was a man who scraped an honest living out of a world that felt increasingly dishonest. He had 5 children, 3 girls, with his current wife, Kathleen, a son named Scott from a previous marriage, and a young boy who was the light of his tired eyes. He worked overtime, took the extra shifts, and sacrificed his own comfort to ensure his children had a chance in an area where the streets were often a siren song for the wayward. But the house on the quiet street in Antioch was not the sanctuary Relis had envisioned. It was a facade of suburban bliss that masked a rotting interior. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale food, unwashed laundry, and the silent, vibrating tension of a marriage that had died years ago. Kathleen Rognaby, Relis's wife, was a woman of sharp edges and restless desires. They were estranged, living under the same roof like 2 ghosts haunting different hallways. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the cold logistics of child-rearing and the mounting pile of bills that Kathleen seemed to generate with reckless abandon. Relis worked until his hands were calloused and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was protective, perhaps to a fault. He hated the culture of the streets that bled into their neighborhood, the drugs, the easy violence, the waywardness of the youth. He especially hated marijuana, seeing it as the first step toward the abyss of wasted potential. He didn't know that the abyss wasn't just lurking at the edge of the neighborhood. It was already sitting at his kitchen table, watching him with hollow eyes. Chapter 2: The Shadow in the Hallway. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like he was made of spare parts and nervous energy. He was scrawny, short, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean in, trying to find the rhythm in his words. He was a young man who lived in the margins, rarely making eye contact. His presence in the house as unobtrusive as a shadow. To the world, he was just a quiet kid who liked video games. To Relis, he was a disappointment, a son who lacked the drive and the grit that had defined the Eastman men for generations. But Scott was watching. He was always watching. While Relis was at work, laboring to maintain the life they lived, Scott observed Kathleen. He saw the way she moved through the house with a practiced, feline grace. He saw the way she looked at her phone with a secret, triumphant smile, and the way she treated his father with a cold, calculated disdain that bordered on cruelty. To Scott, Kathleen wasn't just his stepmother. In the dark, claustrophobic theater of his mind, she was an idol, a victim, and a siren all at once. Scott's world was digital and hidden. He spent hours on the internet, retreating into the anonymity of the screen to escape the suffocating reality of his father's house. His online searches were a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a psychological labyrinth. He began to obsess over the idea of a life where Relis didn't exist, a life where he could be the one to protect Kathleen, where he could be the man she actually wanted, the one who didn't demand order or discipline. The tension in the house was a physical thing. Relis would come home, his boots heavy on the floor, and see the disarray, the dishes piled high, the clothes scattered like fallen leaves, the stale smell of neglect. The arguments would begin before he even took off his coat. "Is it too much to ask for a clean house?" Relis would bark, his voice a low thunder that rattled the windows. "I work 12 hours a day. Kathleen, the least you can do is keep this place from falling apart." "You're never here." "Relis," Kathleen would retort, her voice a jagged blade. "You want a maid? Hire one with the money you don't have. Don't come in here and lecture me about order when you're just a ghost who pays the mortgage." Scott would listen from his room, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He blamed his father for every tear Kathleen shed, for every moment of unhappiness in the house. He saw Relis as a tyrant, a barrier to the happiness he imagined he and Kathleen could share. He began to search, not for jobs or for a way out of Antioch, but for tools. He searched for Harrington and Richardson .22. He searched for ballistics and penetration. He searched for life insurance payouts for accidental death. He was 21 years old, and he was planning a rebirth that would be baptized in blood. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motivation. Kathleen Rognaby was a woman who knew the value of $1, especially $1 she didn't have to sweat for. For 10 years, she had been a drain on Relis's resources, a parasite who thrived on his stability while despising his presence. She had affairs, numerous ones, and had even produced a child with another man. Yet she remained under Relis's roof. She let him pay the bills, let him provide the health insurance, and let him maintain the facade of a family for the sake of her own comfort. She was conniving, a master manipulator who painted Relis as the villain to anyone who would listen. To her friends and co-workers, she was the martyr, the victim of a lecherous, cheating husband who neglected her needs. In reality, it was Relis who was being walked over, a good-hearted man who couldn't bring himself to abandon the children, even if it meant living in a domestic purgatory. But Kathleen was looking for an exit strategy. A divorce was messy, expensive, and would likely leave her with far less than she felt she deserved. A death, however, was a clean break. Relis had a life insurance policy through his company, a value of $1 million. To a woman like Kathleen, that wasn't just a number on a page. It was freedom. It was a new life away from the unkempt house, and the husband whose very breathing seemed to irritate her. 3 weeks before the end, she began to research the specifics. She looked into the clauses, the double indemnity for accidents, and the timeline of a payout. She talked to co-workers about how manipulative Relis was, setting the stage for his eventual disappearance. She didn't know that Scott was watching her searches, too. He saw her interest in the money, and in his warped mind, he saw it as an invitation. If he removed the obstacle, Kathleen would be rich, she would be happy, and she would finally see him as her savior. They were moving in a silent, synchronized dance toward the same conclusion. A mother and a stepson bound by a dark, unspoken pact to convenience and obsession. Chapter 2. The Day the Sun Went Cold. June 25, 2016, started like any other Saturday in Antioch. The California heat was already rising by 10 in the morning, shimmering off the parked cars on the quiet street. Kathleen took the 2 youngest children out for a day of shopping, a routine escape from the stifling atmosphere of the house. Relis was home. He was always home on the weekends, usually trying to catch up on the repairs that never stayed fixed in a house that felt like it was crumbling from the inside out. He was in the garage, perhaps sorting through tools or planning a project that would never be finished. Scott was with his friends down the street, playing video games. It was his sanctuary, his alibi. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Scott felt the pull of the house. He told his friends he had to return the family car to his father. He promised he'd be back in 10 minutes to finish the level. He didn't go back. Scott parked the car a block away, avoiding the line of sight of the neighbor's security cameras. He pulled his hoodie up, despite the heat, and walked toward the house. In his pocket was an H&R Model 999 revolver, an antiquated piece of machinery, a top-rate 9-shot .22 caliber that he had acquired through Bacali channels. It felt heavy and cold against his leg. He entered through the garage. Relis was there, standing near the threshold that led into the kitchen. "What are you doing back so early?" Relis might have asked, his voice stern but not suspicious. Maybe he smelled the faint, skunky odor of marijuana on Scott's clothes there, one thing he had forbidden in his house. "I told you, Scott, if I catch you with that stuff again, you're out. I'm not supporting a drug habit under this roof." Relis, the soldier, the provider, turned his back to walk into the kitchen. He was probably thinking about the next bill, or the next argument with Kathleen. He didn't see his son raise the revolver. The .22 is a small bullet, often dismissed as a target practice round, but at close range, it is absolute. Scott pulled the trigger. The first shot missed, the small projectile punching a clean, straight hole through the television hanging on the living room wall, a silent witness to the betrayal. But the second shot found its mark. It struck Relis in the back of the head, at the base of the skull. The Kansas farm boy collapsed instantly, falling into the threshold between the garage and the kitchen he'd worked so hard to provide. There was no struggle. There was only the sudden, violent intrusion of lead into a brain that had spent 45 years trying to solve the problems of a family that didn't want him. Scott didn't stay to watch the life drain out of his father. He ran, He ran back to the car, fumbling with the revolver. As he tried to clear the spent casings, his hands shaking with a mixture of terror and triumph, one of the small brass shells fell into the spare tire well of the trunk. He drove back to his friends. He played video games. He even went to a store to buy a box of condoms he would never use, desperately trying to construct a timeline of a normal, horny. He thought he had committed the perfect crime for the woman he loved. Chapter 5. The Return. When Kathleen returned with the children hours later, the house was silent, but it was a heavy silence, a silence that felt like it was pressing against the walls. It was her daughter Amia who found him first. Her scream was a jagged tear in the suburban quiet, a sound that would haunt the neighborhood for years. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran in. She saw Relis on the floor. There was blood, so brain matter was splattered against the doorframe. She called 911, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a grieving widow. "Is he alive? Is he alive?" The responders arrived within minutes, the sirens wailing through the Antioch streets. Officer Ramirez was the first to cross the threshold. He saw the family outside, hysterical and refusing to enter. He walked into the kitchen and saw the victim. "Mr. Eastman," Ramirez called out, though he knew there would be no answer. Relis was breathing, but it was the shallow, mechanical sound of a body that had already left the building. At first, the scene suggested an accident. Relis was a big man. The assumption was a medical emergency, a fall, a head cracked against the counter. But as the EMTs lifted him to transport him to the hospital, the truth fell out. A small, mangled piece of lead. "Everyone, stop," Ramirez ordered, his hand moving to his holster. "This is no accident. This is a crime scene." Chapter 6. The detectives. Corporal James Colley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez were the hunters sent into the ruins of the Eastman family. Colley was the veteran, a man who had spent his career closing murder cases, his eyes hardened by years of seeing what people were capable of. Gonzalez was the younger detective, sharp, hungry, and possessed of a digital savvy that would prove to be Scott's undoing. They walked through the house, noting the jarring contrast. The outside was a nice bedroom community home. The inside was a wreck of neglect. "Not your cleanest house," Colley remarked, stepping over a pile of dirty clothes. "Stale food, dishes everywhere." "Execution style," Gonzalez added, kneeling by the blood spatter, back of the head. Someone he knew, someone he trusted enough to turn his back on. They started their search in the perimeter. In the backyard, they found the backpack. Inside was a wallet, marijuana, and the driver's license of Scott Eastman. The detectives exchanged a look. The son's backpack was in the yard, but the son was supposedly miles away. The investigation turned toward the family. They went to the hospital, where Relis lay in the intensive care unit, his life measured in the rhythmic beep of monitors and the hiss of a breathing tube. He was brain dead, a tragedy in a hospital gown. Colley interviewed Kathleen first. She was quick to point the finger at Relis's infant. She painted him as a man with women on the side, a lech who had invited his own destruction. But Colley noticed the way her eyes lingered on the paperwork. He noticed her intense interest in the insurance payout. Then there was Scott. Scott came off as unassuming. Colley would later recall. Scrawny, weird cadence, no eye contact. He didn't seem to have the stomach for a hunt, let alone a kill. Scott told him he was at a friend's. He told them he had a strained relationship with his dad because of the strict rules. He admitted to leaving his backpack outside to hide his weed. He seemed like a low-level loser, but he was lying about his phone. He was lying about his movements, and he was lying about how much he loved his stepmother. Chapter 7. The Echo in the Machine. The break in the case didn't come from a dramatic confession or a smoking gun. It came from an Echo ATM, a cold, unmanned kiosk in a shopping mall where people sell old cell phones for quick cash. Scott had told the detectives he didn't have a phone. He said he'd lost it weeks ago. But Gonzalez, the cell phone guru, knew the digital habits of the desperate. He tracked the transactions at the local Echo kiosk. He found the footage. And there was Scott Eastman, 5 hours after his father was shot, standing at the kiosk. He was selling a phone. He used the very ID he claimed he didn't have. He looked into the hidden camera of the machine with the eyes of a man who thought he had finally won. The detectives recovered the phone from the bin of the machine. It was a digital diary of a descent into madness. There were hundreds of searches for the exact weapon, the H-22. There were searches for ammunition prices and how to shoot someone in the head. And then, there were the mom searches. Scott's phone was a testament to a twisted Shakespearean obsession. He had thousands of searches for incestuous pornography involving He had saved risque photos that Kathleen had sent to other men, viewing them in the dark of his room as he plotted his father's demise. The motive was clear. It wasn't just the $1 million. It was the woman. Scott believed that with Relis gone, he could provide for Kathleen. He could be the man in the house. He could fulfill the dark fantasy that had consumed his young mind. Chapter 8. The Final Threshold. The arrest was a silent, tactical affair. Cali and Gonzalez didn't want to stand off. They went to the house in full gear, the morning light reflecting off their badges. When Kathleen opened the door, the officers moved in like a tide. "Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III." Scott stood up from the couch. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He looked at Kathleen, perhaps waiting for the sunset he had promised himself. As they led him away in handcuffs, Collie pulled Kathleen aside. He told her the truth that her son was in love with her, that he'd murdered his father, thinking they were going to be together. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It wasn't the look of a mother whose son had just destroyed their lives. It was a look of bizarre vanity. She looked almost flattered, as if the blood on her kitchen floor was a tribute to her own beauty. In the end, the jury saw through Scott's meek act. The ballistics from the television and the bullet found in the garage matched the H-999. The casing in the trunk was the final nail. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life in the California penal system. Kathleen was never charged. There was no physical evidence she had handled the gun, and no recording of her asking for the hit. She stayed in the house for a while. The $1 million eventually split among the other children minus the one who had pulled the trigger. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy, was buried far from the dust of Antioch. He was a man who worked himself to the bone for a family that viewed him as an obstacle. The house on the quiet street remains, a shell of a suburban dream. And in a prison cell, Scott Eastman waits for a letter from a stepmother, who has already forgotten his name. His mind still trapped in the shadow of the hallway where he chose a fantasy over his own father's life. Epilogue. Antioch is still a town of 130,000 people. The sun still bleaches. The secret's out of the pavement. The Delta breeze still carries the scent of salt and regret. And the $1 million didn't buy anyone happiness, it only bought a deeper kind of silence. The Glass House of Antioch, Part 2. The Descent into Truth. Chapter 8. The ICU Vigil. The intensive care unit at Sutter Delta Medical Center didn't smell like a home. It smelled like bleach and impending silence. Relis Eastman lay at the center of a web of plastic tubing and humming monitors, a stark contrast to the man who had once hauled hay on a Kansas farm. His chest rose and fell, not by his own will, but by the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator. Kathleen sat by the bed, her face a mask of weary devotion. To the nurses, she was the tragic wife. To herself, she was a woman waiting for a clock to strike midnight. Every beep of the heart monitor was a second closer to $1 million resolution. She held his hand to hand that had worked 40 years to give her a life. She'd spent 10 years betraying and felt nothing but the coldness of a stranger. Scott stood in the corner, his scrawny frame almost vanishing into the shadows of the hospital room. He watched his stepmother with an intensity that bordered on the religious. In his mind, he hadn't killed her father. He had removed an obstacle. He watched the way her hair caught the sterile fluorescent light, imagining the day the machines would stop and their real life would begin. "He's not coming back, Scott," Kathleen whispered, her voice cracking just enough to be convincing. "I know," Scott replied. His voice was flat, devoid of the grief a son should feel. "But you'll be okay now. I'll make sure you're okay." Chapter 9. The Guru and the Ghost. Back at the Antioch Police Department, Detective Adrian Gonzalez was descending into a different kind of darkness. He was the cell phone guru, a man who understood that a person's digital history was more honest than their heartbeat. The Echo RTM had yielded the prize. Scott's discarded phone. As Gonzalez bypassed the security layers, the data began to pour out like a ruptured vein. It wasn't just evidence. It was a map of a fractured mind. "Callie, you need to see this," Gonzalez said, his voice tight. Detective James Callie leaned over his shoulder. The screen was filled with search results. Harrington and Richardson Model 999.22 caliber trajectory. How to clean a revolver. He didn't just stumble into this, Callie noted, his jaw tightening. This was a hunt. He researched the gun, the ammo, the kill shot. He was looking for the H&R 999 specifically. It's an Antica hard to trace, but distinct. Then, Gonzalez typed the keyword that changed everything. The results were a deluge of filth and obsession. Thousands of searches for incestuous pornography, specifically focusing on... There were photos Scott had taken of Kathleen when she wasn't looking at her sleeping, her hanging laundry, her back turned to him. It was a digital shrine to a woman who was technically his mother, but in his mind, his ultimate prize. He didn't kill Relis for the money, Gonzalez whispered. He killed him to clear the bed. Chapter 10. The Interrogation Room Dance. The air in the interrogation room was stagnant. Scott sat across from Callie, looking smaller than ever. He spoke in that strange, rhythmic cadence, trying to maintain the image of the simple weed-smoking gamer. "Scott, let's talk about the car," Callie started, his tone deceptively conversational. "You said you parked a block away to avoid your dad, right? Because he was strict about you driving at night." "Yeah," Scott muttered, picking at a fingernail. He gets real mad. I just wanted to see my friends. But the neighbor's camera shows you walking back toward the house at 8:53 p.m., and you were gone for 45 minutes. That's a long time to just drop off a car." Scott's eyes flickered. The cornered cat look returned. I went to the store to buy condoms. Big box of condoms." Callie leaned in, his shadow looming over the boy. "With what money?" "Scott, your wallet was in the backyard. We found it in your backpack. How do you buy a big box of condoms with no money?" The silence stretched. Scott's breathing became shallow. He was digging his own grave with every stuttered lie. "And the Echo ATM," Gonzalez added, stepping into the room. "The one where you sold the phone you said you lost. We have you on video." "Scott, using your ID, selling the phone that contains every gun search, and every twisted thought you've had about your stepmother for the last 6 months." Scott's voice became a meek, tiny whistle. That wasn't my phone." "It is your phone, Scott, and it's going to be your ticket to a very small cell." Chapter 11. The decision to pull the plug had been made. Relis was gone, his life insurance policy now a looming reality. But before the first cent could be paid, the law arrived. Callie didn't want a quiet arrest. He knew the volatile nature of the household. When the team hit the door on Bigelow Drive, the beige box finally cracked open. "Police, get down." The younger children screamed, Kathleen frozen in the living room, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and calculated indignation. Scott stood up from the sofa, his expression almost serene. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He let them cinch the zip tees around his wrists, as if it were a coronation. "Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III." As they led him out, Callie stopped in front of Kathleen. He saw the flicker of the siren behind her eyes. "He did it for you," Kathleen Callie said, his voice dripping with disgust. "He thought you two were going to ride off into the sunset on Relis's blood money. He's in love with you." The reaction was the most chilling part of the night. Kathleen didn't weep. She didn't faint. She simply tilted her head, a small, vain smile ghosting her lips. "Did he really say that?" she asked, as if she'd just received a compliment at a dinner party. Chapter 12. The Echo of the Gavel. The trial was a clinical dissection of a family's rot. The jury watched the Echo ATM footage. They saw the ballistics reports linking the .2 to slug in Relis's brain to the H&R 999 revolver Scott had researched. They heard the testimony of the daughters, whose lives had been shattered by a brother's depravity. But the most damning evidence was the silence of Scott Eastman. He sat at the defense table, never looking at his sisters, never looking at the image of the father he had executed. When the verdict came guilty of first-degree murder, there was no outcry, only the heavy, leaden weight of justice. 55 years to life. In the aftermath, the insurance money was distributed. Kathleen took her share, retreating into the shadows of a different life, never charged but forever stained by the environment she had cultivated. The house on Bigelow Drive was sold, the laundry and the stale food cleared away, but the ghost of Relis Eastman remained in the soil of Antioch. He was a man who worked until his hands bled to protect a home that was actually a glass house, shattered from the inside by a son who saw love as a target and a father as an obstacle. Epilogue. The Long Shadow. Years later, the daughters of Relis Eastman still look at the sky and wonder about the farm boy from Kansas. They have the weddings he'll never attend, and the children he'll never hold. Scott sits in a cell, the romantic fantasy of his stepmother, now a cold, gray memory. He is a man who traded a father's life for a digital ghost, realizing too late that in the real world, when you pull the trigger, the only thing that waits for you on the other side is the dark. Justice was done, but the glass could never be mended. Relis brought a son into the light, and that son dragged him into the abyss. In the end, Antioch is just another city, and the house on Bigelow is just another box, keeping its secrets behind beige walls and a silent kitchen door. The Fragile Threshold. A novel of Antioch. Chapter 1. The Scorch of Antioch. The sun in Antioch, California, does not merely shine. By mid-afternoon, the heat becomes a physical presence, a dry, relentless weight that bakes the suburban streets until the asphalt ripples like a mirage. It is a town of 130,000 souls, nestled northeast of San Francisco, caught between the industrial breath of the bay and the roll-in, golden hills that turn to tinder in the summer. To the locals, the heat is a familiar enemy, one that forces them into the dim, air-conditioned shadows of their homes. On Bigelow Drive, the houses are arranged in a tidy, deceptive symmetry. Lawns are kept mostly green through a stubborn war with the drought, and the silence is usually broken only by the hum of air conditioners or the distant bark of a dog. But the Eastman house beige, unremarkable, a sanctuary of middle-class normalcy, held a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a held breath, of words swallowed and secrets buried under the floorboards. Inside, the air was stagnant, untouched by the breeze that occasionally rattled the dry leaves of the oak trees outside. It carried the faint, sickly scent of unwashed dishes, stale food, and the heavy static electricity of a marriage that had died years ago, but refused to be buried. The domestic rot was visible in the corners piles of laundry that had become part of the furniture, layers of dust on family portraits that no one looked at anymore. Relis Eastman was a man built from the red dirt and hard winters of Kansas, a former army man who had traded his uniform for the climbing belt of a telecommunications worker. He carried the prairie in his gaiter, steady, unyielding rhythm. He was a man of wires, signals, and binary certainties. He spent his days ensuring the world could talk to itself, while he returned home to a house where the lines of communication had been cut long ago. He lived in a DMZ, sleeping in a separate room from his wife Kathleen, navigating the hallways of his own home like a weary soldier in occupied territory. He was a provider, a workaholic, as his daughters called him, trying to scrape out an honest living in a neighborhood that felt increasingly hostile. Kathleen Rognaby moved through the house like a ghost who still held the keys to the treasury. She possessed a sharp-edged beauty, a face honed by years of resentment and secret calculations. She was younger than Relis, a woman who felt trapped by the very security he provided. To the outside world, she was a mother of 5, a woman holding a complex family together. To Relis, she was the architect of his financial ruin and the stranger who shared his roof. For 10 years, she had been bleeding him dry, as the detectives would later discover, engaging in affairs and even bearing a child by another man while Relis paid the bills. And then there was Scott. At 21, Scott Eastman was a shadow in the corner of the room. Scrawny, pale, and possessed of eyes that seemed to perceive a frequency of reality no one else could hear. He was the relic of Relis's first marriage. He was a Kansas boy who had lost his way in the California haze. To his father, Scott was a disappointment wrapped in a haze of marijuana, smoker boy who lacked the grit to make something of himself. But to Scott, his father wasn't a hero. He was the Great Wall of Antioch, a cold, judgmental barrier standing between Scott and the only warmth he had ever known. That warmth was his stepmother, Kathleen. To Scott, she wasn't the woman cheating on his father. She was a goddess in a house of dust, the only person who looked at him without disappointment. And in the dark, quiet hours of the night, that affection had curdled into something far more dangerous. Chapter 2. The Shopping Trip and the Scream. June 25th began with the kind of heat that made the air feel like a solid object. Kathleen had been out all day with the 2 younger children, seeking refuge in the air-conditioned temples of the local shopping mall. It was a tactical retreat from the tension at home, a day of distractions and consumer comfort. When they pulled back into the driveway in the late afternoon, the house looked peaceful. The garage door was closed, the curtains drawn, but as the car door opened and the children spilled out, the peace was shattered with a violence that no one saw coming. Amia, Kathleen's daughter, was the first to enter. She was a girl of bright laughter, but the sound that came out of her throat as she stepped into the kitchen was a high-pitched tearing of the air. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her young son stood near the doorway, his face a mask of primal confusion. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at the floor. "There's blood everywhere." Kathleen pushed past them. The sight hit her like a physical blow. Relis was on the floor, sprawled in the threshold between the garage and the kitchen. He was face down, his large frame looking unnervingly small in the pool of dark, viscous liquid spreading across the linoleum. It was thick, coagulated, reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. She didn't go to him. She didn't check for a pulse. In that moment of crisis, her instinct was one of distance. She turned and ran back outside, fumbling for her phone, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she dialed 911. 911. "What is your emergency?" "My husband. There's blood. Is he alive?" "I don't know." Her voice was hysterical, a whirlwind of panic that filled the dispatcher's headset. "Ma'am, can you go in and help him? Can you perform CPR?" "No," Kathleen sobbed, backing away from the house as if it were a predator.